My father kindly sponsored a struggling student and even brought him home. Looking at the young man with his delicate and handsome features, I suddenly realized I had been reborn. In my previous life, I loved him as if my life depended on it. When he said he didn't have money for food, I handed over all my allowance without hesitation. When he said he was bullied at school, I stood by his side without a second thought, ready to take on the entire world for him. I protected him, shielded him, and even spent a fortune and leveraged all my resources to launch him into stardom in the entertainment industry. But the first thing he did after becoming famous was to spread lies about me, claiming that I had harassed and bullied him since childhood. He encouraged his obsessive fans to come after me, pushing me to the brink of death. Now that I've woken up in this timeline, I'm determined to watch how his life crumbles without my help. Emma, come here. Let me introduce you to someone. My father's gentle voice broke my thoughts. This is Liam Carter, the student I've been sponsoring. You can call him Liam. Following my father's gaze, I looked toward the living room. Standing there was a boy dressed in plain clothes. He was tall and thin, his hands gripping the hem of his shirt so tightly that his fingertips had turned white. His expression showed nervousness and unease, but his posture remained straight, exuding a sense of stubborn resilience. In my past life, I had been completely captivated by this very image, his combination of vulnerability and defiance. It had drawn me in, making me helplessly devoted, but in the end, it led to my utter destruction, leaving my family shattered and me dead. I could never forget that it was him who had deliberately leaked my address to those rabid fans, stoking their fury until it consumed me. Sponsoring him? Fine. Bringing him home? Absolutely not. I wasn't about to live with a stranger. Slowly, I walked over to the sofa and sat down, letting my cold detachment show in both my tone and demeanor. It's fine to sponsor him, but bringing him home? That's too much. I'm not comfortable living with strangers. Emma. His family situation is quite difficult, my father replied patiently. If I'm not mistaken, our family has supported many underprivileged students. If everyone was like him, wouldn't this place turn into a shelter? I interrupted him, shooting a glance at Liam Carter, my tone icy. Yes, we've sponsored dozens of students, and he's just one of them. His father passed away, and his mother is gravely ill. Feeling sorry for him, you brought him here to study. I used to sympathize with him too, even helped him with small things and encouraged him to adapt quickly to his new environment. But clearly, my kindness didn't pay off. Some people are just ingrates. No matter how much you give, it's never enough. Emma, Liam is different from the others. He has no family here. He's pitiful. Let him stay for a while. Okay, once the college entrance exams are over, he'll leave. My father pleaded, frowning at my uncharacteristic harshness. Pitiful or not, if he doesn't have a place to stay, let him live in one of the nearby apartments. It's not like our family doesn't own extra properties. I shot back coldly. My father looked at me disapprovingly. Emma, why are you suddenly so cold-hearted? Letting him stay here for a while won't hurt you. Fine, I said, standing abruptly. Then I'll move into the school dorms next week. Let him have the house. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked away, refusing to engage further. Wait, don't be like this. My father called after me in frustration. Finally, he sighed and turned to Liam. All right, you can stay in one of the nearby apartments for now. I'll have someone clean and prepare a room for you. Liam's disappointment was evident, but he managed to smile politely. It's okay, Mr. Brown. You've already done so much for me. I'm truly grateful. The next day was the start of the school term. After breakfast, Mr. Cooper was already waiting outside with the car. As I opened the door, I found Liam already seated inside. Mr. Cooper glanced at me and explained, Miss Emma, Mr. Brown said Liam's school is on the way, so he'll be riding with you. Liam looked at me eagerly and handed me a carefully packed breakfast he had prepared. When I looked at the breakfast in Liam's hands, a wave of disgust surged through me. No need, I said coldly. I don't trust food from you. It's filthy. Ignoring his kindness, I turned away and settled into the front passenger seat. Then, as if to emphasize my disdain, I waved my hand dramatically. What's that awful smell in here? Uncle Cooper, open the windows. It's suffocating. Liam froze, clearly stunned that I would say something so blunt. In my previous life, from the moment he stepped into our house, I had been nothing but kind to him, to protect his fragile pride. I had gone out of my way to buy him expensive clothes and shoes, even hiding the price so he wouldn't feel burdened. Thinking back now, I was nothing but a fool. Next time, let him find his own way to school, I said, leaning back against the seat and closing my eyes. I don't like sharing rides with others. Both Liam and I attended the same private high school. My father had transferred him there to make it easier to look after him, which also resulted in us being placed in the same class. On the first day of school, Liam enthusiastically ran to the campus snack shop and bought an armful of treats, presenting them to me like offerings. His eyes gleamed with anticipation and a desire to please, as if these small gestures would bridge the growing distance between us. Between classes, he always sought opportunities to approach me, trying to ease the tension in our relationship. It wasn't long before rumors began to circulate around the school about some supposed romance between us. In my previous life, I had naively believed that he truly liked me. I poured my energy into supporting his dreams, investing in his career, buying scripts, and hiring directors for him. He promised me that once he achieved fame, he would publicly announce our relationship to the world, fans included. In the end, he did make an announcement, but it wasn't the one I had imagined. Instead, he declared to the world that I had relentlessly pursued him, painting me as an obsessive stalker. During those years, I sacrificed my education and career to help him rise to the top of the entertainment industry. After his betrayal, I was left heartbroken and resolved to start anew. Just as I was beginning to pick up the pieces, he called me, claiming he wanted to apologize in person. Despite my hesitation, I agreed to meet him at the cafe we used to frequent. But when I stepped inside, it wasn't an apology waiting for me. It was a mob of his crazed fans. They hurled insults at me, their words turning into physical blows. In the chaos, one particularly deranged fan, who suffered from severe mental illness, lunged at me with a penknife. I was stabbed dozens of times, each strike cutting deep. I collapsed in a pool of my own blood, watching helplessly as my life slipped away. Even after my death, my soul lingered, hovering above as I watched Liam ascend to stardom, stepping on the resources I had provided to become an award-winning actor. The fan who murdered me evaded justice, hiding behind the excuse of mental illness. Because of Liam, I lost everything. Perhaps heaven took pity on me and granted me a second chance. This time, I won't repeat the same mistakes. As the saying goes, retribution may be delayed, but it always comes. I'll see to it that he falls from the heights of his success straight into the depths of despair. The sound of the dismissal bell echoed across the campus. The schoolyard was abuzz as students flooded out of the gates. To my surprise, a sleek Maybach was parked at the entrance, drawing gasps of admiration from my classmates. Through the crowd, I spotted a familiar figure heading toward one of the cars. It was Liam, dressed in a designer school uniform. He was surrounded by a group of fawning classmates. As I walked closer, I noticed the car and driver were part of the new arrangements my father had made for him. "Wow, Liam, is that your car? It's so fancy," one of his friends exclaimed enviously. Liam's lips curled into a small, smug smile, but when he turned his head and saw me standing nearby, that smile froze. "Emma," he called out stiffly, "your dad said you're coming over for dinner tonight. Want to come with me?" Liam asked, trying to distract me. I refused his invitation, staring at him with a look he couldn't quite read before turning and walking away. "Liam, your car is so cool. When are you going to take us for a spin?" One of the students chimed in, attempting to cozy up to him. "Yeah, totally." Another agreed. "You're new here, so you probably don't know a lot of people yet. Maybe we can grab a meal together sometime." Hearing their eager flattery, I couldn't help but smirk slightly. In my previous life, I'd never realized just how fake Liam could be. But then again, he was an actor. Pretending to be genuine was second nature to him. I wondered, wouldn't it be fun to expose his true colors in front of everyone? In the following days, Liam frequently skipped evening study sessions. My desk mate mentioned that he was rumored to be dating someone, a classmate named Clara Evans. who came from a similarly well-off family. Sure enough, after classes, I often saw them strolling hand in hand through the school corridors, looking blissfully in love. At the same time, gossip about Liam being a rich kid spread like wildfire around campus. Someone had snapped photos of him entering and leaving a high-end neighborhood. Observant classmates also noted that every piece of clothing he wore was from a luxury designer brand, each item worth a fortune. The romance between Liam and Clara quickly became the stuff of fairy tales, with everyone talking about how perfect they were together. On a sunny weekend morning, sunlight streamed through the windows onto the dining table as I made my way downstairs for breakfast. To my surprise, there was an extra person sitting with my father. Liam looked a little uneasy, clutching his backpack tightly. "Good morning, Emma," my dad greeted warmly before turning to Liam and pouring him a glass of fresh milk. Liam had some trouble with his studies, so I invited him over to ask you for help, Dad said, patting Liam on the shoulder and gesturing for him to sit. Liam looked nervous as he carefully pulled a workbook out of his bag, casting a hopeful glance my way. I glanced at the workbook in his hands, then deliberately ignored it, choosing instead to sit at the farthest end of the table from him. Liam seemed taken aback by my indifference, glancing between me and my father as though searching for words but holding back. Uncle," he finally spoke, his voice hesitant. "Next week is my birthday. I was wondering if I could borrow your house to throw a party. Is that okay?" I rolled my eyes at his boldness, thinking, seriously? This is my house. If you want a party, why not rent a hotel? You're not welcome here. Turning slightly, I gave him a sidelong glance filled with barely veiled disdain. Liam faltered, clearly caught off guard by my reaction, and turned to my father with a pitiful look. "Uncle, I've already promised my classmates. Please let me host it here," he pleaded. My dad looked at me, seemingly unsure of what to do. After a moment of hesitation, he said, "Emma, he's already told his friends. Can't you just let it slide this once? It's only for half a night. It won't disrupt you too much. You could go out for dinner that evening. I'll give you some money for it." "No need," I replied coldly. "I can afford my own dinner. Just make sure the place is spotless afterward." After some thought, I finally agreed to their request. If Liam wanted to keep up his pretense, I'd let him. For now. The night of Liam's party arrived quickly, but instead of going out for dinner, I decided to stay and observe the spectacle. The living room was filled with laughter and cheers, the noise bouncing off the walls. Guests milled about, chatting and exploring every corner of the house. Just then, a striking figure emerged from the wine cellar. Clara Evans. She was holding a bottle of exquisite Lafite, its crystal-clear surface glinting under the lights. "Liam," she exclaimed excitedly, holding the bottle high above her head. "Look what I found." It was a rare vintage wine that had been part of my grandfather's private collection for years. "Look what I found," Clara exclaimed, holding up the bottle of vintage Lafite she had taken from the wine cellar. "Let's drink until we drop tonight. Okay?" she cooed, leaning seductively against Liam's shoulder. She wrapped her arm around his, her sugary, cotton candy-like voice dripping with affection, making anyone watching feel like they were witnessing the epitome of young love. I sat quietly, observing the scene. Then Clara's gaze shifted toward me. With an almost tipsy sway, she made her way over, a hint of provocation glinting in her eyes. "Emma, why are you always staring at my boyfriend?" she asked, her delicate hand lightly resting on my shoulder. Her tone carried a challenge, soft yet sharp. I glanced at her indifferently but didn't respond, unfazed by my silence. Clara pressed on, her voice dripping with mockery. "I heard that when you were younger. You were always clinging to Liam. He couldn't stand you. If it weren't for his social grace, he wouldn't have invited you to his birthday party. So that's what Liam had been saying about me behind my back." Clara straightened slightly, her tone turning serious and laced with a warning. "Liam is my boyfriend now. You'd better not get any ideas about him. Otherwise, don't blame me for being unfriendly." With that, she turned on her heel and left. The night deepened, the stars dotting the sky like tiny pinpricks of light. The celebration began to wind down, the earlier excitement gradually fading into the quiet of the evening. Exhausted, Most of the guests called for rides and started heading home. Meanwhile, Liam and Clara were still tangled up on the staircase, kissing passionately. Their lips clung to each other like glue, saliva glistening under the dim light. They nestled in the stairwell's corner, their intimacy reminiscent of two butterflies locked in a fervent dance. Oblivious to the world around them, most of the spectators had dispersed, leaving only the occasional whisper or giggle floating through the air. Once the party had ended and the guests had been escorted home by the drivers, I headed downstairs to call my uncle, who had just arrived at the airport. At 1 a.m., I returned to the villa with him. Using the excuse of fetching a blanket for my uncle, I pushed open the door to my room. What greeted me froze me in place. "Ah!" I screamed instinctively, unable to contain my shock. Hearing my cry, my uncle hurried to the room, and we were met with the sight of two naked bodies intertwined on my bed, their movements accompanied by unmistakable sounds of intimacy. "Who are you? And what are you doing in Emma's room?" my uncle demanded, his voice thunderous. The pair on the bed turned their heads abruptly, realizing they'd been caught. "Ah!" came Clara's piercing scream, sharp enough to shake the walls. Both Liam and Clara scrambled to disentangle themselves, hastily grabbing for their clothes. I watched their panicked movements without blinking, my voice steady and cold as I finally spoke. "Liam, I let you use the house for a party, not to do this in my room." The room fell silent for a moment, like the calm before a storm. Clara, seemingly jolted awake from a dream, turned to Liam with wide eyes. Her face, which had been flushed with passion, paled instantly before morphing into a mask of fury. Her gaze was sharp enough to cut. "Liam, what the hell is going on? This isn't your house," she roared, her voice echoing through the room like thunder. Liam's face turned an ashen gray, his bloodshot eyes locking onto me with a venomous glare, as if I were his mortal enemy. Through gritted teeth, he spat, "Emma, you're truly despicable. You knew Dad wouldn't cut off my sponsorship so easily, so you used this opportunity to humiliate me," Liam muttered, his voice low and bitter. He then reached toward Clara, attempting to calm her anger, but she shoved him away with force. He staggered back a few steps before finally regaining his balance, his face a mix of embarrassment and helplessness. Liam could only watch as Clara turned and walked away, leaving him standing there with fury and unwillingness burning in his eyes. He turned to glare at me, seething in silence. "Starting today, our family will stop sponsoring you," I announced coldly, my voice devoid of emotion. "No, you can't do that. How will I continue going to school?" Liam's face went deathly pale, as if all the blood had been drained from it in an instant. "Whether or not you go to school has nothing to do with me," I interrupted, my voice cutting and indifferent. "After what you've done, did you think I'd let you stay in my presence?" Liam stared at me, his eyes filled with rage and frustration. Then, as if recalling something, his voice suddenly rose. "You did this on purpose, didn't you? You planned everything. Emma, why are you doing this to me? What did I ever do to you? Why don't you ask yourself that?" I replied, tilting my head slightly to avoid his angry, resentful gaze. My voice remained calm and detached. "Tonight, you should focus on how you're going to explain Clara revealing your so-called identity to your classmates. Now leave. Don't ever let me see you again." I waved dismissively, as if the mere sight of him disgusted me. Liam clenched his jaw tightly, glaring at me with resentment, but he ultimately turned and left. The illusion Liam had so carefully crafted of being a wealthy heir shattered like a bubble. His vanity and lies were exposed mercilessly, evaporating like dew under the scorching sun. Clara, furious at his deceit, led a group of classmates in exacting revenge. His desk was stuffed with all sorts of bugs and spiders. During breaks, a group of boys cornered him in the restroom and drenched him with buckets of icy, filthy water. In the frigid winter, Liam had no choice but to hide in a bathroom stall. Trembling, his clothes soaked and clinging to his body, the cold wind seeped through the cracks, piercing him to the bone. Clara, once the school's most admired girl and a dream to many, had fiercely protected Liam due to his supposed wealth. But now that his facade was gone, and he was revealed as a mere impoverished student relying on sponsorship, no one held back their disdain. I stood at a distance, Watching Liam's pitiful state, a sense of satisfaction surged through me. It was exhilarating, but my triumph was short-lived. At the school gate, my father's secretary intercepted me. "Miss Emma, the CEO has requested you come to the office," the secretary said. I was led to my father's company, my mind racing with possibilities. Could it be that Dad wanted to congratulate me for securing first place in my grade again? Maybe he had a surprise prepared? With that thought, excitement bubbled inside me as I pushed open the door to his office. A heavy file flew past my face like an out-of-control meteor, slamming onto the floor with a thud that reverberated through the room. Startled, I looked up and saw my father, his face shadowed with disappointment and anger. Beside him stood Liam, no longer in his school uniform but wearing tattered clothes that exposed bruises on his arms. "Emma, how could you stop Liam's sponsorship without my permission?" My father's voice was as cold and unyielding as iron, striking me like a hammer. My mind reeled, and all the excitement and joy I'd felt moments ago evaporated instantly. Liam, tears brimming in his eyes, choked out, "Uncle, it's all my fault. Please don't blame Emma." Furious, I retorted, "Dad, I already told you about this. Liam, he was in my room with his girlfriend, doing that kind of thing. How could we possibly stop his sponsorship?" my father asked, his tone heavy with authority. "Even if Liam made you uncomfortable by doing such things in your room, you could have just switched rooms or let him have yours. Last time, I didn't hold it against you when you threw a tantrum and kicked Liam out. But this time, you must immediately reinstate his sponsorship." My father's disappointed gaze bore into me, his voice leaving no room for argument. I forced myself to remain calm, even though my emotions churned like a storm inside. Without saying another word, I turned and left the office, my heart full of resentment. As I closed the door behind me, I caught a glimpse through the narrow gap. My father was gently patting Liam's shoulder, his expression filled with patience and warmth. For a moment, it looked as if they were truly father and son. I could faintly hear my father's comforting words to Liam. "No one at school will bully you anymore. Don't be upset. I promised your mother that I'd take good care of you." That night, after ensuring my father wasn't home, I slipped into his study in silence. Moving carefully, I searched through shelves and drawers until, hidden within an old, dusty book, I found an aged photograph. In the photo, a man held a woman close, both smiling radiantly with happiness. The man was my father, and the woman's face bore a striking resemblance to Liam. In that instant, my chest tightened as though gripped by an invisible hand. An indescribable emotion surged within me. Judging by the time frame, this must have been before my parents were married. Liam must be the son of the woman in the photo, possibly even my father's illegitimate child. Memories of my past life flooded back. My foolish devotion to Liam, the time I wasted on him, and the humiliation I endured from his obsessive fans. The thought left a bitter taste in my mouth. No wonder my father always favored Liam. From my previous life to this one, his attitude had never changed. The realization left me cold, and as I wiped away a tear, I quietly returned the photo to its place. The next day, I walked into the classroom with a completely different demeanor. In front of everyone, I stood up for Liam. "Emma, what's gotten into you? Why are you defending that liar?" Clara's sharp voice cut through the air as she stormed up to me. "Liam is a student our family sponsors," I replied, feigning reluctance. "My dad made it very clear that I have to treat him well." I glanced at Liam with an expression of forced helplessness, my eyes glistening as though I might burst into tears at any moment. "Otherwise, Dad said I'd regret it." As soon as I finished speaking, the classroom buzzed with whispers. All eyes turned to Liam, filled with suspicion and curiosity. How could a sponsored student be more important than his own daughter? A boy speculated loudly. "Liam must be your dad's illegitimate child." The bold statement sent a ripple of shock through the class. I cast a quick glance at Liam, whose face had turned pale. "That's ridiculous," he stammered, his voice shaky. "I have parents. There's no way I'm Emma's dad's illegitimate child. He only cares about me out of sympathy." "All right, enough. Liam isn't my dad's illegitimate child," I interjected, cutting off the discussion. "Stop spreading rumors." The whispers quieted, and I softened my tone. "Actually, I regret how I treated Liam these past few days. I want to apologize for my rash behavior. I turned to Liam with a gentle smile. I know you're facing some challenges right now, so I'd like to invite you to stay at my house. Since your apartment has been cleared out, you can stay with us for a few days. Liam seemed taken aback by my sudden change in attitude, but after a moment's hesitation, he nodded and agreed. When I brought Liam home, my father was surprised, but he quickly relaxed upon seeing my apparent sincerity. His tightly furrowed brow gradually eased as he observed my demeanor. To make Liam feel more at home, I even suggested that he stay in the very room he had used for his inappropriate actions. I instructed the maids to prepare new toiletries and other essentials for him. My father watched my actions with a flicker of approval in his eyes, even praising me for becoming more considerate and mature. I watched with my own eyes as Liam used the toothbrush, then swiftly placed it into a sealed bag and replaced it with an identical new one. The sealed bag, along with a sample of my father's hair, was sent to a testing center. Liam was only a few months older than me. If he truly was my father's child, it would mean my father had an affair during his marriage to my mother. The company my father now managed was originally founded by my grandfather. After my grandfather's death, ownership passed to my father and uncle. Before my mother passed away, she had a contract drawn up by her lawyer and announced it to the entire company. The contract explicitly stated that if my father had an illegitimate child, he would lose his shares in the company and be forced to resign as chairman. Thinking back to my father's subtle reactions in my past life, how he responded when I confessed my feelings for Liam, and when Liam's fans attacked me, I couldn't help but take a sharp breath. But when the test results arrived, they revealed something I hadn't expected. Liam was not my father's child. After Liam moved into our home, his behavior mirrored what I remembered from my past life. He acted as if he were the young master of the house, indulging in lavish meals daily, while his closet filled up with high-end designer clothes. Each time I noticed the growing ambition in his eyes, I silently sneered to myself. The old saying came to mind: before you destroy someone, first let them grow arrogant. I subtly instructed the maids to casually mention near Liam that my father's shares could be taken away if he had an illegitimate child. As I expected, Liam fell right into the trap. One day after school, Liam approached me, suggesting we take a walk by the river to talk things over. The night was dark as ink, with a cool breeze brushing against us. In the distance, birds chirped from the treetops, adding a lively touch to the otherwise quiet evening. We strolled side by side along the riverside path. Liam handed me a bottle of water, a faint smile on his face. Emma, I don't know why you've been so hostile toward me, but we've lived together for a while now. I hope we can talk things out. I accepted the bottle, my gaze drifting to the dim streetlights flickering along the riverside. With an ambiguous smile, I glanced at him before slowly drinking from the bottle. Liam seemed satisfied with my response, finishing his own drink in one gulp. But what he didn't know was that the moment he handed me the bottle, I had already discreetly swapped our drinks. Soon, his steps grew unsteady, and his face flushed red. He touched his forehead in confusion, finally realizing something was wrong. Emma, you switched the drinks, he shouted, his face contorted in rage. His eyes bulged as if he wanted to devour me alive, but it was already too late. That moment, a group of small-time thugs from the park began approaching us. Seizing the opportunity, I shouted loudly enough for them to hear. This is my dad's only illegitimate son. If you hold him for ransom, my dad will definitely pay a huge price to get him back. Ignoring the shock and panic in Liam's pale expression, I turned and ran off into the night. The next day, sunlight poured over the campus. Liam's seat in the classroom remained conspicuously empty. When the dismissal bell rang, I leisurely walked out of the classroom, only to see my father waiting for me at the school gate. Standing beside him was Liam, his face visibly bruised, his eyes filled with anger and resentment. The moment my father spotted me, he strode forward and, without hesitation, slapped me across the face. My right ear buzzed, and a sharp pain spread across my mouth. I tasted the salty tang of blood as I licked the corner of my lips. Just then, my uncle, who had come to pick me up after work, witnessed what happened. Furious, he stormed up to my father, grabbed him by the collar, and slapped him hard across the face. "How dare you hit Emma?" my uncle roared, his voice trembling with anger. "Uncle, you're finally here," I said, my voice shaking as relief washed over me. My face hardened as all the frustration and fear I had been holding in finally came pouring out. I had anticipated my father would confront me, so I called my uncle before school and asked him to pick me up afterward. Uncle clenched his fists, his expression dark as he glared at my father. "Lin Qinshu, what do you think you're doing? Hitting your own daughter?" Blood trickled from my father's nose as he held it with one hand, trying to stem the flow. Furious, he snapped, "This is a family matter. It's none of your business, much less Qingyi's." His muffled voice, combined with his attempts to stop the bleeding, made him look almost comical. Uncle sneered coldly, "As long as I promised my father and sister that no one would bully Emma, it is my business. So tell me, who here is the outsider?" At the mention of my mother, my father's demeanor shifted. His usual calm composure crumbled, his emotions visibly flaring. The truth was undeniable. Before marrying my mother, my father was nothing more than an ordinary, impoverished man. It was only through my mother and grandfather's support that he had climbed to where he stood now. A flicker of something crossed his face as he seemed to realize this, and his expression faltered. At last, he lowered his hand and muttered, "Fine, we'll let it go this time, but there will be no more trouble with Liam going forward." Uncle, however, remained firm. "Lin Qinshu, you're the one in the wrong here. Apologize to Emma." To everyone's surprise, my father suddenly turned and slapped Liam hard across the face. Tears immediately welled up in Liam's eyes as he choked out a tearful "I'm sorry" to me before my father dragged him away. On the day of the board meeting, the secret recording of Liam and my father at school, along with the fabricated DNA test results I had prepared, detonated like two powerful bombs in the conference room. The tension in the air was palpable. My father, who had initially maintained a facade of calm, suddenly became ashen-faced. "Mr. Lin, it's better to stop playing dumb and start considering your resignation," Uncle said, his voice cold as steel. He stood off to the side, his sharp gaze fixed on my father like a blade. For a moment, my father's expression contorted with anger and disbelief. "What do you mean by that?" he spat, glaring at Uncle. Uncle smirked, his eyes icy. "Don't forget, Lin Qinshu, how you confidently promised the board back then. You swore that if you ever had an illegitimate child, all of your shares would be unconditionally transferred to Emma." As his words settled over the room, the tension reached its peak. My father had climbed to his position as CEO by leveraging his connections and playing politics with the older shareholders. But those same shareholders, like reeds swaying in the wind, always shifted toward whoever held the most power. Whatever Uncle had promised them, it was enough for them to turn against my father, unanimously opposing his continued role as chairman. By midnight that evening, news of Lin Qinshu's ousting from Jiang Group had spread like wildfire, dominating the top headlines of the financial world. The announcement caused a stir throughout the business community. Uncle temporarily took over management of the company, promising to return it to me after I graduated from college. When I returned to the villa, my expression was cold as I ordered the maids to evict both Lin Qinshu and Liam. Liam, a man both ungrateful and insatiably greedy, had yet to learn of my father's downfall. He screamed and cursed, his sharp voice echoing throughout the now empty villa. "Emma, just wait until Dad comes back. He'll make you pay for this." His voice reverberated off the walls of the villa, a property that had always been under my name. It was a birthday gift from my grandfather to my mother, and thus my inheritance. My father, attempting to console Liam, spoke in a gentle tone, trying to calm him down. Then, turning his gaze to me, he sighed deeply, his expression filled with disappointment. "Emma, I'm still your father. And Liam, he's practically your brother. Are you really going to be so ruthless, leaving no room for negotiation?" My father let out a deep sigh, his voice tinged with helplessness. I let out a soft laugh, mocking his naivety. Casually, I pulled out the DNA test results from the file cabinet and tossed them onto the table in front of Lin Qinshu. "Oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you, that previous test? It was fake. This is the real parentage report for you and Liam." Lin Qinshu's face instantly turned pale. His hands trembled as he picked up the report, scanning its contents. Every word seemed to strike him like a hammer blow to the heart. You dared to deceive me. His voice quivered with anger as he turned to Liam and slapped him hard across the face. As his voice rose, it was no longer just filled with fury. It was tinged with despair. Liam's complexion drained of all color as he stared blankly at the report, as though the entire world was crumbling around him. His dreams of wealth, his fantasies of being part of an affluent family, all of it vanished like a puff of smoke. I watched the drama unfold with cold indifference, waving my hand to signal the maids to escort them out of the villa. That was the last time I saw either of them. Occasionally, I heard news about them through others. Lin Qinshu, unable to cope with the devastating blow, became mentally unstable and eventually developed dementia. He often muttered to himself about having another son. Liam, equally shattered by the harsh reality, dropped out of school. It was said that he started working at a nightclub as an escort. Before long, he contracted an illness that left him gaunt and haggard. His former arrogance and ambition reduced to nothing. As for me, I continued moving forward on my own path. After countless days and nights of hard work, I was accepted into a prestigious international university at the age of 18, majoring in finance. By the time I turned 22, my uncle smoothly handed over the family business to me. From that point on, I led the company to even greater success while carving out my own journey. My life became a narrative of my making, a story of triumph and brilliance waiting to be written. After my husband passed away, overwhelmed by longing, I picked up the German journal he often wrote in front of me. I brought it to my granddaughter, who had just returned from studying in Germany, and asked her to tell me what he had written. To my surprise, she chuckled and said, "Grandpa was so romantic. He even wrote you love letters. Every entry starts with 'My dearest Hannah.'" I felt as though lightning had struck me. All those years of sharing a life together. Turns out it was all a lie. He never mentioned my name. Instead, his first love's name, Hannah, filled the pages of his journal, entry after entry. He had written about his longing for her. When I opened my eyes again, I had somehow returned to the days shortly after we were married. This time, I resolved not to endure his silent cruelty anymore. I would let us both go. The ceiling above me was stark white and painfully bright. I shifted slightly, and the man beside me seemed to notice. Turning over in his sleep, I looked at him, David in his early 20s, still carrying a hint of youthful innocence. He was undeniably handsome, but as I now knew, handsome men often have the coldest hearts. He sensed my gaze and frowned impatiently. That familiar expression sent a chill through me, bringing back memories of countless days and nights of his emotional neglect. Mornings like this had always been the same. He would either greet me with cold silence or sharp, cutting words that felt like daggers. The calendar on the nightstand caught my eye. June 12, 1988. We had been married for just 3 years. Gripping the edge of the bed, I felt a wave of nausea rise in my stomach. My body felt weak, but I tried to steady myself. "David," called out weakly. He glanced at me indifferently, his gaze cold and detached. "If you're awake, get up and make breakfast. Stop dawdling." "David," I murmured again. "I think my gastritis is acting up. Can you take me to the hospital?" I bit my lip, my voice almost pleading. He paused for a moment but quickly resumed fixing his shirt in front of the mirror, as though he hadn't heard me. Before we married, his refined, scholarly demeanor had captivated me. Now, felt like a cruel joke. Finally, he spoke. "I have plans. Go by yourself." I watched him step toward the door, knowing exactly where he was going to Hannah's wedding, just as he had done years ago, when he abandoned me at our own wedding to attend her graduation ceremony. "David," I called out again, my voice barely audible, with a faint tremble. He turned to look at me, his eyes cold and impatient, as though asking, "What now?" To him, I was nothing more than a convenient wife, a placeholder to satisfy his family's demands for marriage. In the 3 years we'd been married, he had barely touched me. The most intimate moment we had shared was the perfunctory kiss he had planted on my forehead the day we registered our marriage. Cold sweat trickled down my back. I was in pain, but he couldn't see it. Or refused to. He smirked dismissively and walked out. I knew he didn't care about me. He never had. My struggles, my feelings, they were always insignificant to him. Summoning all my strength, I crawled out of bed. My stomach churned violently, and my vision blurred. But I forced myself to go to the hospital. The doctor said my acute gastritis was caused by prolonged stress and irregular eating habits. I needed to be hospitalized for a few days for observation. Lying on the hospital bed, I stared at the sky outside the window, my mind racing with countless thoughts. Was this really my life? Was I destined to spend it in the same haze of misery as in my previous life? No, not this time. I had been given a second chance, and I was determined to live for myself. When I returned home, David wasn't back yet. A note lay on the table, scrawled in his signature messy handwriting. My mom wants dumplings tonight. Be sure to come home early to make dinner. I let out a cold laugh, crumpled the note into a ball, and tossed it into the trash. Then I opened the wardrobe and pulled out the red dress I had been saving for years. I had bought it with money I secretly saved while David was away on a business trip. I had always wanted to wear it for him, but I never had the courage. Standing before the mirror, I gathered my hair up into a high bun, exposing the elegant curve of my neck. Picking up the phone, I dialed a number. Hello? Is this Ms. Wang? It's me, Laura. I've made up my mind. I want to return to the troupe. After hanging up, I gazed at my reflection in the mirror. A confident smile curled at the corners of my lips. By evening, David returned home. He looked at me, surprised, as though wondering why I hadn't rushed to greet him at the door like I usually did, offering him slippers and a cup of tea. Instead, I sat calmly in the living room, holding a cup of tea. My tone was steady as I said, "Let's go to the Civil Affairs office tomorrow." A flash of surprise, maybe even admiration, crossed his eyes as he took in my appearance, but it was gone in an instant. "For what?" he asked. "To get a divorce," I said. The moment those words left my mouth, I felt as though a heavy stone that had been weighing on my chest for years had finally been lifted. I could breathe freely again. "Do you even know what you're saying?" He finally looked me in the eye, a faint trace of mockery in his tone. "I know exactly what I'm saying," I replied, meeting his gaze head-on. "I want a divorce." He ignored me, poured himself a glass of water, and said, "I'm hungry. Is there anything to eat? Once we're divorced, you can go find your Hannah anytime you like. I won't stand in your way." I said coldly, "What nonsense are you talking about?" He frowned impatiently. "Just hurry up and make me something to eat. I'm starving." "David," I said, my voice trembling with emotion, "if you love Hannah so much, why didn't you fight against the pressure and marry her in the first place? Why won't you let me go now?" "You don't know what you're talking about," he muttered, his gaze darting away from mine, unable to meet my eyes. "I don't know." I let out a bitter laugh, tears streaming down my face. "David, ask yourself honestly, have you treated me fairly all these years? What do you take me for?" I stood up, my voice rising as years of pent-up resentment and anguish spilled out. 3 years of marriage. How many times have you touched me? How many times have you cared about me? In your eyes, in your heart, is there anyone besides your first love? Hannah, you even wrote love letters to her in your journal right in front of me. What do you take me for? David, you. How did you know about that? His face paled, his voice faltering. I laughed bitterly, my tone dripping with sarcasm. How could I not know? Did you really think I couldn't feel it? Did you really think I was completely oblivious? I looked at him, my eyes filled with disappointment and sorrow. David, you're nothing but a coward. You didn't have the courage to stand up to your parents, the courage to pursue your so-called true love. And yet you turned to emotional infidelity within our marriage to escape reality. You're a coward through and through. Enough, Laura. Don't push it too far. He yelled, his voice echoing in the empty room. You want a divorce? Fine. Let's do it. Tomorrow. We'll go. His shouting reverberated, but my heart was numb. I stared at him, my gaze calm. All right, I said before turning and walking into the bedroom, closing the door behind me. At dawn, I opened my eyes. The space beside me was already empty, as I expected. David had left without a word. Avoiding the situation entirely, I let out a bitter laugh. I wasn't sure how I felt. Hurt, relieved, or maybe both. I decided to visit the city's dance troupe. Before marriage, I had been one of their star performers. Many people said I was born to dance. But for the sake of this marriage, I had given up my career and the stage I loved, dedicating myself entirely to him and this home. When Ms. Wang, the troupe's manager, saw me, her eyes lit up. She quickly pulled me to sit on the sofa. "Laura, you're finally here. I thought you were too proud to come back." She laughed as she peeled an orange. I took the orange from her and smiled faintly. "How could that be? Ms. Wang, thank you for thinking of me." Noticing my subdued mood, Ms. Wang grew serious. "Laura, I don't know what's going on with you, but life goes on. A woman needs to have her own career. Don't you think?" I nodded. She was right. I couldn't spend this life stumbling around aimlessly as I had before. "Don't worry. If you're ready to return, your position is still here for you," Ms. Wang assured me. "We're preparing to stage a new dance drama. If you're interested, you can take a look at the script first." She handed me a thick script from a drawer. I flipped through a few pages. It was a love story adapted from a folktale, and I immediately found myself intrigued. "What do you think? Do you like it?" Ms. Wang asked. I nodded. "I like it very much. Thank you, Ms. Wang." "Great. Take your time reading the script, and we can discuss any ideas you have later." She patted my hand encouragingly. "I believe in you, Laura. You can do this." Holding the script, I felt a spark of excitement I hadn't experienced in a long time. Yes, I still had dreams. My life was still full of possibilities. I wouldn't let myself be defeated so easily. I spent the whole day at the dance troupe, and my mood lifted significantly. When I returned home that evening, the house was empty and lifeless. I made a simple bowl of noodles and ate while lost in thought. Suddenly, there was a loud, urgent knock at the door. "Who is it?" I asked, walking to open it. "It's me, Laura. You need to go to the hospital right away. Something's happened to David." It was Mrs. Reed, my nosy neighbor from upstairs, looking both alarmed and slightly smug. "What's going on, Mrs. Reed? Don't scare me," I asked, my heart sinking. "How could I scare you?" Mrs. Reed said with an exaggerated wave of her hand. "I saw it with my own eyes. David was carried out of the motel, covered in blood. It was terrifying. You should go see for yourself." With that, she darted away, clearly afraid I'd ask more questions. I didn't waste time thinking it over. Grabbing a jacket, I rushed out the door and headed for the hospital. When I finally arrived, I saw David lying in a hospital bed. His face was bruised and swollen, as if he'd been beaten severely. Sitting by his side, tears streaming down her face, was Hannah. Her eyes were red and puffy, and she looked so pitiful that anyone who saw her might have felt sorry for her. "David, how are you? Does it hurt?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm fine. Just a scratch," David replied weakly, forcing a faint smile. He reached out and held Hannah's hand. "Hannah, don't worry about me." Standing at the doorway, I watched the scene before me, feeling nothing but bitter irony. "Laura, you're here." Hannah finally noticed me and greeted me with an air of forced politeness. Her voice, soft and demure, was laced with fake innocence. David noticed me too. His eyes flickered briefly, but he didn't say a word. "What happened to you, David?" I asked, my tone neutral. Before he could answer, Hannah began sobbing again and hurried to explain. "Laura, don't blame David. It's all my fault. I was supposed to fly back to Germany today, and David was just seeing me off. My husband misunderstood and this happened." I let out a cold laugh. "Seeing someone off requires a motel room?" Hannah's face turned pale. She bit her lip and fell silent. "David, let's get a divorce," I said flatly, my voice devoid of emotion. Hannah's head shot up at my words, a glimmer of hope flashing in her eyes. She suddenly knelt in front of me, clutching my hands and crying. "Laura, please don't get divorced. I know you're upset, but it's just a mistake. David still cares about you. He was just confused for a moment." Her act made me feel nothing but disgust. After all these years, She was still playing the same fragile, innocent victim. It was as if every problem was someone else's fault, and she was perpetually the one being wronged. David struggled to sit up, looking genuinely distressed as he reached out to comfort her. "Hannah, stop this. Get up. The floor is cold." It was the first time I'd seen David so tender and caring toward a woman. And that woman wasn't me. I let out a bitter laugh. "What's this? A melodrama? Two married people embracing each other like this?" David snapped. "Laura, enough. Haven't you caused enough trouble? Do you have to be so relentless?" I stared at him coldly and enunciated. "Tell me, what part of what I said isn't true? David, if you don't come to the Civil Affairs office tomorrow to divorce me, I'll go to the papers. Let's see how the world reacts to what the two of you have been up to." Hannah burst into even louder sobs at this, clutching David's arm desperately, her words a garbled mess. David's face darkened. He had always been careful about his reputation. If this turned into a public scandal, his career as a university professor would be over. "Fine, I'll do it," he finally said. His voice strained. I nodded in satisfaction, turned around, and left the hospital room. Back at home, I began packing my belongings, planning to move into the dormitory at the dance troupe the next day. This apartment was faculty housing allocated to David by his university. I had no intention of keeping it. It wasn't something I had paid for, and it held no value to me anymore. There weren't many valuable items in the house. Over the years, David had only given me a small allowance each month, and I had to scrimp and save to send money to his mother. There was never any chance to build up savings. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I looked around the empty room, and a wave of sorrow swept over me. I had given everything I had to this home, only to end up with nothing in return. I had foolishly believed that if I treated him well enough, he would eventually be moved. But I was wrong. Some hearts are like stone. No amount of warmth can soften them. I stuffed a few simple clothes and necessities into a suitcase. Everything else, I decided, would stay behind for David and his true love. Once I was done packing, I sat in the barren room and felt an unexpected sense of relief. After so many years, I was finally breaking free from this dreadful marriage. The next morning, I went to the Civil Affairs office. David was already there, waiting. He looked haggard, with dark circles under his eyes and unkempt stubble on his face, as though he had aged 10 years overnight. When he saw me, he opened his mouth as if to speak but ultimately said nothing. The divorce process went smoothly. In less than 30 minutes, we were handed our divorce certificates. As we walked out of the office, David called out to me, "Laura, do you really want this?" "It's over, David." I interrupted him. "Everything is over. From now on, we're strangers." Without waiting for his response, I turned and walked away without looking back. The dormitory was modest, with only a bed, a table, and a chair. But I was content, determined to regain my best form as quickly as possible. I worked harder than everyone else. Even while resting, I stretched to maintain flexibility. Basic skills were critical, and although I hadn't let them completely slip during the 3 years of my marriage, I was still a bit rusty. One day, as Ms. Wong helped adjust my stage headpiece, she looked at me thoughtfully. "Laura, are you sure about this? Really divorced?" I glanced at my reflection in the mirror and smiled faintly. My appearance hadn't changed much. My foundation was still good, but years of hardship had left me looking worn out. Oddly enough, now that I was divorced, I seemed to glow with newfound radiance. "Don't worry about me, Ms. Wong. I know what I'm doing," I said calmly. She sighed but didn't press further. As I fastened the buttons on my practice uniform in front of the mirror, someone called out from outside the room, "Laura, someone's looking for you. They're downstairs." Hurriedly, I went downstairs and saw David standing there. He wore a wrinkled shirt, looking even more disheveled than before. He was a shadow of the impeccably dressed university professor he once was. "What are you doing here?" I asked coldly. He lowered his head, his voice subdued. "You want me to give you the family savings?" David's words made me laugh out of sheer disbelief. "David," I said, "you've got some nerve asking me for money. What savings? All these years, Every penny I've scrimped and saved went toward buying supplements for your mom and gifts for your precious first love. David's face darkened. Laura, how can you say that? That money was rightfully my mom's. And Hannah, she hasn't been well and needed care. I nearly laughed out loud at how shameless he sounded. So self-righteous. I pulled a ledger from my bag and tossed it in front of him. See for yourself. Every single expense for this house over the years is written in there. David flipped through the pages, his face growing grimmer with every line. See it clearly, Professor David, I said with a cold smile. If there's nothing else, don't bother me again. He closed the ledger, a flicker of embarrassment crossing his face. Laura, we were husband and wife. After all. Enough, David. I interrupted sharply. Let's part ways amicably. Don't come looking for me again. He hesitated before asking awkwardly, Laura, how do you keep white shirts from yellowing? And what about ironing? What's the best way to do it? I froze for a moment, staring at him in disbelief. This was the same Professor David who had never lifted a finger in the house. Now coming to me for household advice? Ask your mom. I replied coldly. She's the expert. With that, I turned and walked away. In the days that followed, David seemed like a changed man. He started showing up at the dance troupe every few days, asking me trivial questions. Laura, if I add too much soy sauce, will the dish turn out too salty? Laura, how do you clean water stains off the floor? Laura, I noticed one of my shirt buttons came loose. Could you sew it back on for me? I rolled my eyes. Go ask your Hannah. She doesn't know how to do these things. Why should I help you? David had no reply to that. Left speechless, I continued. Let me make this clear. David, I'm not some saint with infinite patience to feel sorry for you. If you're going to live your life, then live it. Don't bother me. Despite my words, he kept complaining. First about how Hannah couldn't cook, then about how she couldn't clean. As if he were the world's most pitiful victim. I got so sick of hearing it that I told the security guard not to let him in anymore. Finally, peace returned to my life. Every day, I trained until my legs ached, sweat soaking through my clothes. But as I looked at my reflection in the mirror, growing lighter and more graceful with each passing day, I felt a surge of strength. I was like a butterfly emerging from its cocoon, greedily soaking in the sunlight and rain, yearning to shine brightly on stage. The day of the performance finally arrived. With meticulous makeup and a stunning costume, I twirled and leaped under the spotlight, pouring all my emotions into every move. It was a farewell to past pain and a hopeful embrace of the future. As the curtain fell, thunderous applause erupted from the audience, echoing endlessly. In the crowd, I spotted David. He stood there, his expression complicated, holding a bouquet of flowers. After the performance, I removed my makeup, changed back into my own clothes, and walked out of the theater. David approached me and held out the bouquet. Congratulations, he said. Laura, your dance was breathtaking. I took the flowers, my voice cool and detached. Thank you. Laura, do you think we could start over? He asked, his eyes carrying a glimmer of hope. I froze for a moment, staring at him, feeling as though he had suddenly become a stranger. David, I said calmly, I feel nothing for you anymore. It's over between us. His face turned pale, and he remained silent for a moment, as if trying to gather his thoughts. Finally, he spoke. Laura, I regret everything. Hannah, she's not suitable for a real life together. She's too delicate, too dependent on me. Every day with her feels exhausting, suffocating. I couldn't help but find it laughable. The man who once treated me as if I were invisible, who spoke to me with cold indifference, was now disparaging another woman in front of me, hoping to earn my sympathy. David, that was your choice, I said with a bitter laugh. Who was it that ignored my mother when she was sick in the hospital because you were busy with her? Who forgot my birthday just to buy her gifts? And now, you're coming to me, saying she's not good for you and begging me to take you back? Dream on. Still unwilling to give up, he said. Laura, I've already lowered myself enough. What more do you want? I know I made mistakes, but I'm truly sorry now. Hannah and I haven't even registered our marriage. Can we start over? David, I said, looking him directly in the eye. Do you know what I regret most since our divorce? I regret ever agreeing to marry you in the first place. I regret not leaving you sooner. The light in his eyes dimmed, and he looked utterly defeated. Laura, it's over between us. Let it go. With that, I turned and walked away, ignoring his desperate voice calling after me, filled with panic and despair. Laura, don't go. Please. I didn't look back. My steps were light, and my heart was at peace. Later that evening, I celebrated the success of the performance with my colleagues. The atmosphere was warm and lively, with laughter and joy filling the air. Laura, you were amazing tonight, Lily said excitedly, raising her glass. It feels like you're glowing, just like the old days. Absolutely. Another colleague chimed in. Since your divorce, you've become more radiant than ever. I smiled, raising my own glass. To our brilliant performance. Cheers. Cheers. Everyone echoed. The next day, I received a notice from the dance troupe. A new film was in the works, and the director, having seen my performance, felt that my demeanor and appearance perfectly matched the female lead. They wanted me to audition. Holding the notice, my hands trembled with excitement. I immediately dove into the script, studying it line by line, immersing myself in the character's inner world. It was as though I had fallen into a trance, completely consumed by the story. But a sharp, shrill voice suddenly yanked me out of my concentration. What are you doing? Before I could react, a rough hand grabbed my hair and yanked it hard, sending a sharp pain through my scalp. I gasped in pain and looked up to see David's mother glaring at me, her face twisted with anger. You wretched woman. Instead of staying at home to take care of David, you're here fooling around. What do you think you're doing? I pried her hand off my hair and said coldly, Mrs. Brown, David and I are divorced. Whatever I do now is none of your business. She scoffed, her expression full of disdain. Divorced? It's because you couldn't give him a son that he wanted to leave you. And now Hannah is pregnant. You better go back and take care of her. When the baby is born, you can be the child's second mother. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not only had David and Hannah betrayed me, but now they wanted me to go back and work for them? Get out, I said firmly, and take your ridiculous demands with you. Even if no one else wants me, I'd never let myself be humiliated by your family again. I spat out, glaring at David's mother. You insolent brat. You've grown wings, haven't you? How dare you talk to me like that? She shrieked, her voice trembling with fury. She raised her hand, ready to slap me. Hey, what's going on here? Calm down. No need to get physical. A few of my colleagues said as they hurried over, stepping in to stop her. They managed to hold her back, speaking over one another in attempts to defuse the situation. Unable to move, she gritted her teeth and shouted venomously, You just wait. This isn't over. I watched her storm off, her fury tangible even in her retreating figure, and let out a cold laugh. I'm not the submissive Laura I used to be anymore. But I had underestimated her. Soon, she began spreading malicious rumors, accusing me of being promiscuous, claiming that my divorce from David was because I couldn't handle being alone and had been seeing other men. First, I paid no attention to the gossip. I thought, the truth will stand on its own. Let her say whatever she wants. But I never expected the rumors to spread like wildfire, twisting into something even more damaging. The fallout was worse than I could have imagined. One night, I was alone in the rehearsal studio, practicing late. The door creaked open softly. Without turning around, I assumed it was one of my colleagues. Still here this late? Why not head home and rest? Before I could hear a response, a chilling gust of air swept past me, and then a rough hand clamped over my mouth. Another arm wrapped tightly around my waist, pinning me in place. I froze in terror, my heart nearly stopping. I struggled desperately, but the person holding me was far too strong. A disgusting voice hissed in my ear. Your mother-in-law said you can't go a day without a man. Let me take care of you tonight. I recognized the voice. It was Lou Air, a temporary worker at the troupe. He was notorious for being lazy and lecherous, always taking liberties with the young women around him. I never thought he'd dare to lay a hand on me. You're lying. Let me go, I shouted, my voice muffled under his grip as I thrashed against him. She said you'd love the attention. Luer sneered, his grip tightening. Don't be shy. Let's have some fun. His hands became bolder, wandering where they shouldn't. Panic surged through me, and in desperation, I bit down hard on his arm, using every ounce of my strength. Ack! Luer cried out in pain, loosening his grip just enough for me to shove him away. I stumbled toward the door, my legs shaky, but before I could get far, he grabbed my hair and yanked me back, throwing me harshly to the ground. You filthy woman! You dare bite me! He roared, raising his hand and slapping me hard across the face. I'll show you what happens when you defy me. My ears rang, and my vision blurred. Before I could gather myself, his fists and kicks rained down on me like a storm. Curled up on the floor, I shielded my head as best I could, screaming at the top of my lungs. Help! Someone! Please help me! Suddenly, the door was kicked open with a loud crash, and a blinding beam of light poured into the room. What do you think you're doing? An angry voice roared. It was the security guard on his nightly patrol. Drawn by my cries for help, Luer froze, panic flashing across his face. He scrambled to his feet, stumbling as he bolted out of the room, tripping over himself in his haste to escape. I struggled to get up, but my body felt completely powerless. My vision blurred, and before I could do anything, everything went dark. When I finally managed to open my eyes again, my surroundings were a hazy blur. After blinking a few times, I could make out the white ceiling above me and the anxious face of the troop leader by my side. Oh, my dear Laura, you're finally awake. He grabbed my hand tightly. How are you feeling? Does anywhere still hurt? I tried to sit up, but the pain from my injuries made me suck in a sharp breath. Stay down. Don't move, the troop leader said, pressing my shoulder gently to keep me lying down. The doctor said you need to rest and recover. His voice was filled with concern. I've already reported this to the police. That bastard won't get away with what he did. Instinctively, I reached up to touch my ear. Felt strange, as if there was a barrier muffling all sound. Troop leader, why does it feel like I can't hear you very well? He hesitated, a flicker of guilt in his eyes. The doctor said the nerves in your left ear were damaged. It should recover with rest. So don't worry. Focus on getting better. Leave everything else to us. Troop leader, I said weakly. What about the film audition tomorrow? I've been waiting for this opportunity for so long. He sighed, his face full of pity. Laura, you're young. There will be other chances in the future. Don't lose heart. At his words, the tears I had been holding back finally spilled over. Just then, the door to my hospital room opened. I heard you were hurt, David said as he walked in, holding a mesh bag with a can of fruit inside. I came to check on you. I was immediately furious. Save your fake concern. If it weren't for your mother spreading rumors about me, would I have been attacked in the first place? David frowned, clearly displeased. Laura, stop making a fuss. What does this have to do with my mom? Making a fuss? I was assaulted and ended up in the hospital, and instead of addressing that, you're accusing me of making a fuss. My voice was sharp with anger. David hesitated, his expression shifting. Laura, let's put the past behind us. If you're willing, we can remarry. I'll take care of things with Hannah and the baby. You won't have to worry about what people say. I'll make sure no one looks down on you again. I let out a cold laugh. David, you're dreaming. Let me be clear. I find the idea revolting. His face darkened at my unwavering stance. With a hint of disdain, he said, Laura, don't be ungrateful. Look at your situation now. You've already been. He didn't finish the sentence, but I knew exactly what he meant. He was insinuating that I was no longer pure because of what had happened. Taking a deep breath, I stared at him and said, enunciating every word clearly, David, listen carefully. Even if I stay single for the rest of my life, I will never have anything to do with scum like you again. Now get out. Leave. Right now. Seeing that I was immovable, David finally dropped the pretense. Fine. Laura, don't come crying to me later. Get out. I shouted, grabbing a pillow and hurling it at him. It hit him squarely, and his face twisted in frustration. With a final glare, he slammed the door and stormed off. As for David's mother, She didn't have much time to stir up trouble for me. Shortly after, the authorities arrested her for spreading rumors that had led to criminal consequences. In those days, inciting such harm wasn't taken lightly and could even carry a death sentence. As for Lou Air, the man who attacked me, he was so terrified after being caught that he broke down completely. In his desperation to save himself, he tried to drag someone else down with him. He implicated David's mother, my former mother-in-law. She was the one who orchestrated everything, paying him 500 yuan and giving him a movie ticket with the promise of another 500 yuan once the job was done. In the end, Lou Air was sentenced to death, and my former mother-in-law received a 10-year prison sentence for incitement. As for David, his career as a university professor was ruined. The scandal brought so much negative attention that the school, under immense pressure, fired him. It was a striking turn of events, almost as if karma had come full circle, and it happened so swiftly. When I was discharged from the hospital, I had lost a significant amount of weight, and my hearing was permanently damaged, fluctuating unpredictably between good and bad days. The troop leader, worried about my spirits, tried to console me. "Laura, don't lose hope. Medical advancements overseas are incredible. When the time comes, we'll get this treated." I forced a faint smile, but deep inside, I felt lost. I didn't know what the future held for me. Then, as if fate had given me another chance, the film director reached out. He told me that after countless auditions, he still hadn't found the ideal female lead, so he decided to give me another opportunity. I vowed silently to seize this chance. As I stepped into the audition room, I closed my eyes and recalled the script storyline. Quickly, I immersed myself in the character's world. My performance flowed naturally. With raw and genuine emotions, I portrayed the female lead's transformation from innocence to resilience, navigating life storms with gripping authenticity. The director's eyes lit up more and more as I acted. Finally, he slammed the table and exclaimed, "Yes, you're the one." When I opened my eyes, I saw the excitement on his face, and my heart surged with joy. I had done it. I had secured the lead role. The filming process went smoothly, and I found myself increasingly in sync with the character. The director praised me, saying I was born for this role. To ensure the production stayed on schedule, I stayed with the film crew, isolating myself from the outside world entirely. By the time we wrapped up shooting, I had grown even thinner, but my spirit had never been brighter. "Laura, this film is going to be a hit," the director said enthusiastically, patting my shoulder. "Mark my words. You're going to become a household name." I smiled but didn't respond. Fame and fortune no longer mattered to me. All I wanted was to prove myself. After the wrap party, the troop leader pulled me aside, his expression complex. "Laura, there's something I haven't told you," he began hesitantly. "What is it?" I asked. He sighed deeply. "It's about your ex-husband. He attacked Hannah. He's currently being held at the police station." Stunned, I listened as the troop leader recounted the series of events. After David was fired from his teaching position, his family's savings were drained to compensate Lou Air's family. Left with nothing, they had to move into a tiny, dilapidated apartment. Hannah, spoiled and pampered all her life, couldn't stand the hardship. She began arguing with David every day, blaming him for deceiving her and saying she would never have left her ex-husband if she'd known David was so useless. David, constantly berated and humiliated, didn't dare say a word in his defense. Desperate to provide Hannah with a better life, he started asking everyone he knew for help finding a job. But due to the family's criminal record, no company was willing to hire him. Out of options, David ended up working at the docks, doing grueling, filthy labor. Yet even that wasn't enough to satisfy Hannah. The money David earned wasn't nearly enough to support Hannah's extravagant lifestyle. Frustrated, she decided to reach out to her ex-husband, the only one who could give her the life she truly wanted. Behind David's back, she went to the hospital and secretly terminated the pregnancy. When David found out, he was utterly devastated. He confronted Hannah, demanding to know why she would do such a thing. But Hannah coldly told him that she didn't want to live this miserable life anymore. Overcome with rage, David grabbed a fruit knife and stabbed Hannah in a fit of anger. Now, David is in custody at the police station and will likely face prison time. Hannah, though gravely injured, was fortunate enough to avoid a fatal wound to her heart. She's still in the hospital recovering. The troop leader shook his head, sighing, "What a mess. Just look at what their lives have come to." Listening to him, I felt a mix of emotions, but I didn't dwell on it. Their fate was no longer my concern. My own life was moving forward, and I had brighter horizons to chase. The troop leader patted my shoulder gently. "Laura, don't overthink this. None of it has anything to do with you. Let it go. We've got a plane to catch." I smiled faintly and turned toward the boarding gate. The film turned out to be a massive success, and I became a sought-after star. My schedule was packed with promotional events across the country, leaving me so busy I barely had time to think about anything else. I reveled in the joy of success and gradually let go of the pain from my past. International calls began flooding in, with invitations to various film festivals arriving like snowflakes. I turned down most commercial projects, choosing instead to focus on more meaningful, artistic films. I basked in the spotlight, savoring the flowers and applause that came with my achievements. I heard that David was sentenced to 5 years in prison, and Hannah, due to the incident, lost her ability to have children. Her wealthy ex-husband naturally wanted nothing more to do with her. In the end, she left for a faraway place, alone. How they were doing now was no longer my concern. Goodbye, David. Goodbye to everything from the past. My life was turning a brand new page. That concludes today's story. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to my channel. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next video.